I need you to understand what it feels like to lose everything in the same week. Not dramatically. Not in a fire or a flood or anything that earns you sympathy cards and casseroles from neighbors. Just quietly, in the specific way modern devastation happens, an email on a Tuesday, a conversation on a Thursday, a suitcase by the front door on a Saturday morning. My name is Vivian. I was 34 years old, and until that Tuesday I had been the regional director of marketing at one of the largest consumer goods companies in the country. 12 years. I had built that career from an entry-level coordinator position, working through pregnancies that never happened, through relocations, through the particular exhaustion of being the only Black woman in the room and deciding every single day to be undeniable anyway. Then the company restructured. That is the word corporations use when they want to remove people without saying remove. Restructured. My position was eliminated. My access badge stopped working at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and by 5:15, I was in the parking garage with a box of desk items and 12 years of institutional knowledge that was no longer required. I drove home. I told my husband, Dominic, at the kitchen table that evening over a dinner I had stopped tasting halfway through. He listened. He asked clarifying questions. Was it performance-related? Was there a severance package? What was the timeline? Practical questions. The questions of a man doing math. I answered them. Severance was 4 months. Performance was not the issue. Timeline was immediate. Dominic nodded. He ate his dinner. He said, "We'll figure it out." I believed him. I had spent 6 years believing him about things. 4 days later, he sat across from me at that same kitchen table and told me he thought it would be better if I stayed somewhere else while I got back on my feet. That having me home all day was disrupting his work-from-home schedule. That he needed the space to be productive. I looked at his face for a long time. The face I had married at 28. I looked for the man I thought I knew. He looked back at me with the calm eyes of someone who had already decided. "Somewhere else," I said. "Just temporarily," he said. I went and packed my own suitcase. Let me tell you what 6 years of marriage had actually been, now that I was sitting in my best friend Camille's spare bedroom with a suitcase and 4 months of severance, and the specific silence of a woman whose life has just been rearranged without her permission. Dominic was 37. An architect. Handsome in the deliberate way of men who are aware of it, sharp jaw, close-cut dark hair always edged perfectly, the kind of grooming that takes longer than he admitted. He was charming at dinner parties and exacting at home, and I had spent 6 years interpreting his exacting nature as high standards rather than what it actually was. Control. Quiet, practiced, beautifully disguised control. When I made more money than him, which I had, for the last 3 years, he called it a blessing. But I watched what it did to him in small ways. The way he corrected my opinions in front of people with a smile. The way he managed the joint account in a manner that always required him to be consulted. The way "we should talk about this" always meant "I have already decided and need you to agree." I had not seen it clearly until the moment he suggested I leave my own home because my income had stopped and his comfort required space. Camille, 41 years old, a corporate attorney with a laugh like a thunderclap and zero tolerance for anyone who wasted her time, sat on the edge of the spare bed the first night and looked at me with her large dark eyes and said, "Tell me exactly what he said." Word for word. I told her. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then, "He asked you to leave because you lost your job," he said temporarily. "Vivian." She said my name the way lawyers say things they need to land. "He asked you to leave because you lost your job." I looked at the suitcase at the foot of the bed. "I know," I said. "Okay," she said. "So here's what we're going to do. You are going to use these 4 months of severance and everything you know, 12 years of everything you know, and you are going to build something. And then we are going to watch what happens." I looked at her. "I already know what I want to build," I said. I had known since the parking garage. Are you enjoying the story so far? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because trust me, there's a lot more story to be told. Without wasting much time, let's continue. Here is what happened in the parking garage at 5:15 on that Tuesday. I sat in my car for 22 minutes. Not crying, I want to be clear about that. I have nothing against tears, but mine were not ready yet. They were still somewhere below the shock. I sat and I thought, and I looked at the box of desk items on the passenger seat, a framed photo, a plant that had survived 3 office relocations, a notepad with 12 years of margin notes, and I thought about what I actually knew. I knew marketing. Not the performance of marketing, not the PowerPoint version of marketing, the actual mechanics of how human beings decide to trust a brand, to attach themselves to an idea, to become loyal to something. I had spent 12 years studying this in one of the most complex consumer markets in the country, and I had been paid well for it, and now that knowledge was sitting in a parking garage in my head with nowhere to go. I also knew something else. I knew the gap. In 12 years of working in consumer goods, I had watched product after product after product launch to Black women as an afterthought. Campaigns designed by committees who didn't include us, market research that lumped us into broad demographic categories, products that were never quite right, and brands that were never quite honest. And I had watched those products fail and watched the companies shrug and move on to the next cycle. The gap was not in the products. The gap was in the understanding. What if the brand was built from the inside? By someone who was the market, who understood it not as data but as lived experience. I had a name for it by the time I started the car. I had a concept. I had 12 years of industry knowledge and 4 months of runway, and a best friend with a law degree who owed me a favor from 2019 that I had never collected. I started the car and drove home to tell Dominic. He was doing math at the kitchen table. For days later, I was in Camille's spare bedroom with my suitcase, but the idea was still entirely mine. Untouched. Unaffected. Ready. I opened my laptop that first night and I started writing a business plan. The spare bedroom became an office within 48 hours. Camille brought in a proper desk lamp on day 2 without being asked. On day 3, she appeared in the doorway with a whiteboard she'd pulled from her own home office and propped it against the wall without comment. By day 5, the room had index cards on every surface, color-coded by category, brand identity, target market, product development, funding strategy, competitive analysis. I was not grieving. I was building. The business was a marketing consultancy with a consumer brand division attached, specifically focused on Black women consumers, 18 to 55, across beauty, wellness, home, and lifestyle categories. Not a niche product. A full-service intelligence and brand-building firm that would do what the companies I'd worked for never could: create authentic, data-backed, culturally precise campaigns that actually converted. I called it Meridian. I worked 16 hours a day. I called every contact I had built in 12 years, former colleagues, brand managers, agency creatives, procurement leads. I was not asking for charity. I was offering something specific. A pitch meeting with a woman who had sat on the other side of the table long enough to know every mistake they were making and exactly how to fix it. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 interested parties. Not confirmed clients, interested parties. But in business, interested parties who have your calendar invitation open are already closer to yes than no. Dominic called on day 9. I let it ring. On day 11, he sent a text, just checking in. Hope you're doing okay. I read it once. Then I put my phone face down and went back to the whiteboard. Camille handled the legal structure, LLC formation, contracts, intellectual property. She billed me nothing, and I told her I would give her a percentage of the first year's profit, and she said, "We'll talk about it," which meant yes. My former colleague Marcus, 38, a brilliant brand strategist I'd worked alongside for 7 years, heard through the industry grapevine that I was building something and called me directly. "Tell me about Meridian," he said. I told him. He said, "I'm in." 3 weeks out of my marriage and my job, I had a business partner, a legal structure, a brand name, and something I had not had in years: forward momentum that belonged entirely to me. The pitch meeting happened on a Thursday, 31 days after I'd been handed my box in the parking garage. I want to tell you I was calm. I was not calm. I was the specific kind of controlled terror that looks like calm from the outside: steady hands, measured voice, eyes that stay on the person across the table even when every internal alarm is going off. The company was a mid-size wellness brand that had tried and failed 3 times to break into the Black women's market. They knew their product was good. They did not know why it kept failing. They had hired 3 agencies before me who had all told them variations of the same thing: increase diversity in the campaign imagery, buy more ad space in Black publications, use a few more culturally relevant references. It had not worked, because they were treating symptoms instead of diagnosing the disease. I sat across from their CMO, a woman named Sylvia, sharp-eyed and skeptical, who had clearly heard enough pitches to have developed a specific immunity, and I did not show them an ad campaign. I showed them data. 12 years of pattern recognition translated into a precise diagnosis of exactly where their brand had broken trust with Black women consumers, why it had broken, and the specific pathway to rebuild it. I showed them the gap between what their brand claimed to value and what their purchasing journey communicated. I showed them the exit points, the exact moments in the customer experience where Black women left and did not return. I showed them what authentic community engagement looked like versus what they had been doing. Sylvia had not moved in 11 minutes. Then she said, "How long would the initial engagement take?" That was not a question about whether. That was a question about when. I said, 90 days for phase 1. Full strategic repositioning in 6 months. She looked at Marcus, then back at me. "We need to see a formal proposal," she said. "You'll have it Monday morning," I said. We shook hands. Marcus and I walked to the elevator, and when the doors closed, he looked at me and said, "She's going to sign." I already knew. The magazine story happened because of Sylvia, though she would tell it differently. What Sylvia did was mention me to a journalist named Priya Okafor, who was writing a feature on Black women entrepreneurs disrupting traditional marketing. Sylvia mentioned me as a source. Priya called me for a 30-minute background interview. The 30 minutes became 2 hours. Priya called back the next day and asked if I would be comfortable being the feature subject rather than a source. I said I needed to think about it. I thought about it for 4 hours. Then I called Camille. "A national business magazine wants to feature you as the cover story," Camille said, in the tone of a lawyer summarizing a situation for a client who is not seeing it clearly, "and you need to think about it. I just want to make sure the business is solid enough." Vivian. The business has 1 signed client, 1 in negotiation, and a brand strategy that 3 people in the industry have already called the most intelligent reframing they have seen in years. The business is solid. Say yes. I called Priya back and said yes. The photo shoot happened on a Wednesday. A warehouse studio, 4-person crew, a stylist named Jade who dressed me in a structured deep burgundy blazer over a crisp white blouse and fitted dark trousers, and looked at me when she was done and said, "You look like the answer to the question." I didn't know what that meant exactly. But when I looked in the monitor between shots and saw my own face, not performing, not managing, just present and clear and entirely mine, I understood what she meant. The issue came out on a Friday. My face. The cover. The headline. The gap filler. How Vivian built the company the industry didn't know it was missing. I sat in Camille's spare bedroom, still my base of operations, by choice now, not necessity, and held the physical copy and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Arrived. He didn't call immediately. That surprised me. I had expected immediately. He saw it on a Friday. I know because Camille told me. He had apparently called Camille's personal number, which told me everything about the state of his information network. Camille, who answered the call with the warm detachment of a woman who has been a lawyer for 15 years and has heard better opening lines, told me about it over dinner that same evening. "He wanted to know if you were okay," she said. "He wanted to know what was happening," I said. She pointed her fork at me. "Correct. He texted me that night at 9:47. I know the time because I was reviewing the second client proposal and my phone lit up beside the laptop. I saw the magazine. I'm proud of you. I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down. Here is what I felt, and I want to be honest, because I think this is the part that matters most. I felt nothing dramatic. Not rage. Not satisfaction. Not the triumphant vindication the movies would script for this moment. I felt something quieter and more complete, the specific feeling of a person who has moved far enough forward that what is behind them has lost the ability to reach them. I was no longer in the place he had left me. I had not been in that place for weeks. I had been building something in the gap he created, and the gap had turned out to be exactly the right size space for what I needed to build. Marcus called me the same night. "Second client signed," he said, without preamble. "What?" "The proposal went through. They signed this afternoon. I've been waiting to tell you in person, but I can't wait anymore." I sat in the spare bedroom that was no longer spare, now covered in white bards and index cards, and the beautiful organized evidence of a company becoming real, and I let myself feel it. 2 clients. A magazine cover. A business I had built in 38 days from a parking garage idea and 4 months of severance. I called my mother Josephine. She cried. I did not, but I let her cry for both of us. Then I went back to the proposal on the laptop. There was still more to build. He came to Camille's building on a Tuesday morning. I know this because the doorman called up and Camille, who was working from home, answered and then appeared in my doorway with an expression that required no translation. "He's downstairs," she said. I saved my document. I changed out of my work-from-home clothes, a plain tee and dark joggers, into the structured dark burgundy blazer I had worn on the magazine cover and fitted dark trousers, and my pointed-toe black heels. Not for him. For myself. Because I had learned in 38 days that how you dress for a conversation determines how you enter it. I went downstairs. Dominic was in the lobby. He had dressed carefully, dark slim trousers, a structured jacket, his close-cut hair freshly edged. He looked like a man who had prepared for an audience. "Vivian," he said. "Dominic," I said. He suggested coffee. I suggested the lobby seating area, which was public and had no coffee, which meant the conversation would be what it needed to be and not extended by beverages and small talk. We sat. He told me he had been wrong. He used that word directly, which surprised me enough that I noted it. Wrong. He said the conversation at the kitchen table, the one where he'd suggested I find somewhere else to be, had come from a place of fear and selfishness. He said watching the magazine cover had clarified something for him about what he had done. A magazine cover clarified it, I said. He heard the edge in that. "Vivian, you didn't need a magazine cover to know that asking your wife to leave because she lost her job was wrong, Dominic. You needed to be a different person. The cover didn't change what you did. It just changed the optics." He was quiet. "I'm not saying this to punish you," I said. "I'm saying it because I need you to understand the difference between being sorry because of what I became and being sorry because of what you did." He looked at his hands, then at me. "Is there any possibility?" "No," I said. Gently. Completely. "No." I stood up. I thanked him for coming. I went back upstairs. Camille was in the kitchen when I walked in. She looked at my face and handed me a cup of coffee without asking. I sat down and got back to work. At 90 days, Meridian had 2 signed clients, a third in final negotiation, a brand identity that Marcus had built to look like what the industry should have been building all along, and a piece of earned media that most startup founders spend years trying to manufacture and never achieve. We hired our first employee, a 26-year-old brand researcher named Zola, razor-sharp and meticulous, who had been doing this work informally for a mid-size agency and had read the magazine piece and emailed us a 4-page unsolicited analysis of our methodology with a note at the bottom that said, "I think you're missing a data layer and I know what it is. Please hire me." We hired her the same week. My mother Josephine drove 4 hours to take me to dinner to celebrate the 90-day mark. She sat across from me in a restaurant I had chosen, not the most expensive, the most meaningful, a place run by a Black woman chef I had been following for 3 years. And she looked at me the way mothers look at daughters who have walked through something and come out altered. "You look different," she said. "I am different," I said. "Is it the business?" I thought about it honestly. "It's the clarity," I said. I spent 6 years in a marriage that taught me to make myself smaller in small ways. And then the job ended and Dominic made it explicit, and I had to decide what I was actually made of. Josephine reached across the table and covered my hand. "Your grandmother," she said, "would have called this a clearing. When God removes everything that was covering your real life so you can finally see it." I sat with that. The divorce papers had been filed the previous week. Camille handled it, of course, methodically, with the specific precision she brought to everything that mattered. Dominic had not contested anything. I think by the time the papers arrived he understood that there was nothing to contest, that the woman he had asked to leave had already left, in every way that mattered, long before the documents made it official. The third client signed on a Thursday. I called Marcus. He said one word, Meridian. We both said nothing for a moment, just holding the word between us. It was enough. Here is how it ends. Not in a single triumphant moment, but in the accumulation of real things that cannot be taken back. Meridian at 1 year. For clients, 12 employees, a second magazine feature. This one a double-page spread in a finance publication that focused on the business model rather than the origin story, which meant they were taking us seriously as a company and not just a narrative. Revenue that exceeded what my salary had been. An office space, a real one, with glass walls and a whiteboard that was not borrowed from Camille's home office, and a plant on the reception desk that was not the one from my old desk box, but felt like a continuation of it. Marcus became a full partner at 6 months. He had earned it before then, but the paperwork caught up in month 6. Zola became our head of research at 9 months and hired 2 people beneath her, which meant she was already managing and thriving, and I had known that about her from the 4-page email. Camille and I still have dinner every Thursday. She has never let me pay for more than my half, and I have stopped arguing about it. My mother Josephine came to the office opening. She stood in the lobby and looked at the Meridian logo on the wall, a clean, strong wordmark in deep gold on a dark background, designed by a young woman we found through Zola, and she pressed both hands flat against her chest and said nothing, which was the right response. Dominic remarried 14 months after our divorce. I know because Camille mentioned it, not as information designed to affect me, but the way you mention something in passing that you assume the other person can hold without difficulty. She was correct. I held it without difficulty. I genuinely wished him well and meant it, which told me everything I needed to know about how far I had traveled. The morning he had told me to find somewhere else to be, I had packed a suitcase and driven to Camille's and sat in the parking lot for 6 minutes before going inside, deciding whether this was survivable. It was not just survivable. It was the beginning. I am Vivian. I was 34 years old when a Tuesday email and a Thursday conversation and a Saturday suitcase reorganized my life without my permission. I am 36 now. And everything I have I chose. That is the whole story. And it is enough. Moral: what looks like the end is sometimes the precise moment your real life finally has room to begin. The people who remove themselves from your story sometimes do you the greatest favor. They clear the space for what was always meant to be there. The end. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for watching. I hope it stayed with you and gave you something to think about. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and be part of the journey. There's so much more story still to come.